Can you hear me? All right. So it's my turn to share with you some of the regulatory issues. I think you heard from Professor Trout, there are some technical, business, and regulatory issues that we need to consider to implement continuous processing. I have a presentation. I hope it will not be overly detailed that will get you really bored from all the regulations and so forth. So I will try to be brief but comprehensive at the same time. And we have the rest of the day today and tomorrow morning. Feel free to approach me if you have specific questions. I'll be happy to share with you what I have and also provide the appropriate references. So this outline of my talk. I think before we talk about continuous manufacturing, I think we need to frame the conversation in a bigger picture. Why do we need innovation to start with? Why are we in that business? I think, and I hope that all will agree that innovation is needed in order to develop and deliver critical medicine to the patient. This is a task that brings us all to this meeting. We have remaining unmet medical needs. I think it's very important that we have and reach increased global availability. And a key issue for someone who worked in the regulatory and quality, both as a regulator and in industry, that we have some old drugs that can benefit from new innovation and improved quality assurance. Enhancing manufacturing efficiency and reduce cost is a key issue, and also to be able to continue to develop drugs, but with more environmentally friendly ways. We also would like to use this opportunity to improve the current regulations. I think you heard the question about validation, and this is just one topic where regulatory improvement is needed. So why aren't we doing as well and as fast as we like? I think there are some real business reasons for that and some regulatory reasons. So among the business reasons we are listing here, it's not easy to develop new manufacturing and build a new facility. It's fairly expensive. And for new molecules, and you heard from Dr. Trout, some of the new areas and new modalities that are currently being developed, the task in industry is to bring these molecules to the patient as soon as possible. I don't think there is an appetite to wait for a few years to build a new facility in order to use a new manufacturing facility to deliver the molecule. So that remains to be an issue. Uncertain commercial forecast. I think justifying to the CEOs, how do we need to build a new facility while we have some underutilized facilities existing? That's a real issue. Pharma industry is very conservative for some good reasons and some not so good reasons. There is unpredictability on the return of investment for some new technologies. Complexities of supply chain. Supply chain, we can talk about that for a long time. And also continual improvement is not built into corporate business model. Let me explain that in just a minute here. I think some of us who worked on the new quality vision and the ICH and all these regulations, etc., our intention that industry will continue to improve quality regardless whether there is a regulatory need or not. And in order to do that, you have to have the budget to do that. There is no set budget in every industry to continue to improve unless they have to. Okay. There are some regulatory concerns as well. I think lack of global harmonization is a big issue. It's nice to go and talk to the FDA. What about Japan? What about Korea? What about China, etc.? So one of the things that I'm dedicating a good portion of my time now is to ensure global regulatory harmonization. I will explain more what are we doing in this space. There is conservative culture among the industry and regulators. We have some old regulations. And one of the key issues and one of the key challenges is post-approval regulation. What do I mean by that? If you have a current process and you want to change it, you have to go through the loops for regulator to accept the changes in the manufacturing process. I have been leading a group to develop a new ICH guideline, ICH Q12, on life cycle management. We reached step 3, and I'm hoping in Singapore in 2 months, we'll finalize the guideline. I'm going to mention the relevance of ICH Q12 to continuous manufacturing very shortly. The other issue, and I hope you don't look at me and smile only, but there is lack of trust. And I think we need to continue to collaborate, industry, academia, and regulator together to improve relationship and to develop a more trusting relationship. At times, when industry approach a regulator in a certain region with an intention to build a new facility or to change the process, there may be some kind of suspicion, what are you up to? Is this only because to reduce cost? What's the impact on quality, and so forth? I think we need to change the conversation where we are all aligned and have more trusting relationship. I think you heard about benefits of continuous manufacturing from Professor Trout. Some of these benefits, not comprehensive list, are listed on the slide, but I'm not going to read it for you. Let's focus on the regulations. What's happening in the regulation at this time? I think the regulatory environment now supports advanced regulatory science and innovation. Regulators encourage industry meetings. So my advice to you, my first advice to you today, is if you are interested as a vendor, manufacturer of equipment, or as a manufacturing using equipment to produce product using continuous manufacturing, it's very important to have a conversation with the regulators. The regulator will open the door for you to do that. But don't go to ask questions. Go with a plan. Here is my strategy, here is my plan, and here is how this is aligned with the regulation. Don't go to the regulator and ask them to be your consultant if you wish. You have to go to the regulator and share with them your approach to manufacture, etc. We have some recent ICH guidelines, and Professor Trout talked about BAT and quality by design. And we developed ICH guidelines aligned with these concepts. They are listed here, 8, 9, 10, and 11. It's very important, regardless of what guideline to use or what manufacturing process to use, that you realize that the current expectation of quality will not change. So you cannot reduce or maneuver around the current expectation. And the challenge, or as a matter of fact, the easy way to do it, is to share your approach and how this is aligned with the current regulations. I mentioned there are several ICH guidelines, GMP regulations, etc. There are also some new ICH guidelines. I briefly mentioned the ICH Q12, the life cycle management, which should be very important, not only for changing or transitioning from batch to continuous, but also in continuous itself, and I'm going to talk about that. The other 2 ICH guidelines, Q13 for continuous manufacturing, Q14 for analytical quality by design, these are currently under development, and good progress is happening there. In addition to that, like today's meeting, there has been a large number of global and regional conferences on continuous manufacturing in the last 5 years. ISPE, FBAC, GIA, AABS, et cetera, et cetera. I cannot list them all. But one particular group of meetings that I'm very proud to be a member of is the International Symposium of Continuous Manufacturing of Pharmaceuticals, where we already had 3 symposia in 2014, 16, and 18. And Professor Trout is a co-chair of the steering team. Sal and myself are a member of his team, and we work collectively with the regulators. So the nice thing about this, it's an academic-centered, but also have collaboration among industry leaders, Novartis, Merck, Pfizer, et cetera. And also we have the global regulators. And I have been tasked by Professor Trout and others to find an aligned regulatory approach to continuous manufacturing. So I have been working with regulators from US, Europe, Japan, Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal is to work collaboratively to find the regulatory framework to do that. That has been nice since we do not have a specific guideline. And I'm going to share with you some of the regulatory expectation based on the discussion and the publications we had from this symposium. This is a list of what regulatory references available today. And what I would like to do next is to talk to you about regulatory and quality consideration of continuous manufacturing. This discussion can take hours and hours. I'm going to be brief to allow sufficient time for questions and also for lunch. So I think the current regulatory framework is adequate, as I mentioned earlier, for continuous manufacturing. I also mentioned that early and frequent communication between manufacturer and regulator is a must. One thing that I think is missing to some extent, so this is happening. I have seen companies like when I worked in a larger pharma company, we had several meetings with regulators. I have seen it on the other side as a regulator, and I see it now as a consultant, consulting some companies of how to do this. One thing that's missing, and that is vendors, manufacturers of equipment, are not vocal enough and engaged enough with the regulators. And I think this is a missing link. So maybe EMA and others can start to become a little bit more of a partner in this environment. Quality risk management. So I think it's very important to set your regulatory approach and how that approach will be different, or maybe different, maybe not, from traditional batch approach by conducting a thorough quality risk management. You have to do the risk assessment and the risk communication, risk controls, et cetera, to identify areas that warrant special attention or warrant extra control, et cetera. One of the key area of the regulatory aspect of continuous is how to define the batch. I have heard this question hundreds of times. To me, it is the easiest question to answer because the current regulation allows for that. Basically, you can define the batch based on quantity of material or duration of process. However, you cannot change that during manufacturing. So if you are setting a manufacturing process for a certain product, you must, at the beginning, define how your batch will be defined. You have to define your batch. You could, however, communicate with the regulators that under certain circumstances, that batch may change, either because of market demand or because of quality aspects, because of equipment aspects, etc. But you have to lay down in advance what your definition of the batch is and the circumstances that may deviate from such a definition. The regulators will not accept you going on making half the quantity you intended to have because of poor quality or because of malfunction of equipment, and then you resume that at a later time without having an appropriate quality control and the SOP to guide you to do that. Some of the major challenges from a quality aspect of continuous manufacturing is what do you do when you have problem running the process, because you are going to run the process for a long time. What do you do when you have a problem? When do you stop, and what do you do after you stop? Are you going to quarantine some of this material? Are you going to throw out the entire batch, or what? To me, it's important, but it is not really different from what we do now, because under the current GMP, we have what's called deviation management, right? So in other words, when you manufacture the process, when there is some deviation in the process, you have to have SOPs to manage this deviation. This is not a whole lot different. The process is different, the controls are different, but the concept is the same. What I would like to focus on in my regulatory presentation in the next 20 minutes or so, 3 areas. One is process development and manufacturing process description. The second is control strategy. And the third are quality and GMP expectations. So, manufacturing process description. The typical approach we use today, describing a manufacturing process to the regulator in order for them to approve the process, and in order for them to understand the process, is the same as in the batch process. The challenge is, with continuous process, you have considerably more engineering details. And industry, justifiably, are concerned about providing these engineering details as part of the manufacturing process because of post-approval manufacturing changes. What if you make some improvement or updating to some of the engineering aspect of the process, not the quality aspect, the engineering aspect of the process? Do you have to notify the regulators? Do you need to stop the entire manufacturing until you get that approved from year to 5 years? So that's where some of the issues that I'm hoping Q13 will address. In my view, good progress has taken place in ICH Q12. Took us about 4 or 5 years to agree with the regulators on the following: that when it comes to manufacturing process, there are 2 aspects. Some of these aspects are called established conditions, and the rest are called supportive information. So in other words, when you describe the manufacturing process, you are not obligated to, but you could have a subset of the process parameters defined as established condition. And these established condition, if you make changes to, you will have to go through the regulators. Okay? The rest are supportive information. This is revolutionary in my view. But again, it has to be tested and see how this will work. I'm also hopeful that ICH Q13 will confirm and elaborate that concept that we already introduced in ICH Q12. So after November this year, ICH Q12 will be finalized, and this information will be available. I'm assuming, and I'm working directly and indirectly with my colleagues in Q13 to make sure that they build on this foundation. There is another aspect that we introduced in ICH Q12, and I'm sharing it today because it's new. It's called performance-based. What does that mean? Many of us who worked in developing writing guidelines and policies, we focus so much about manufacturing process, what's critical, what's non-critical, which process you control, which process you don't control, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we're thinking a little bit differently. Does it really matter what process you control or not control if you can ensure the performance of the unit operation? So in other words, you have a unit operation and the inputs can change as long as the outcome of this operation provide you with the material that has the desired quality and specification. So the concept of rather than working on individual parameters, you approve the unit operation in its totality is revolutionary. We introduced that in ICH Q12. It was not easy, but it is there, and I'm hoping it will be built on in ICH Q13. Some of these things I realize I'm speaking too fast, and some of these new, but I'm available to answer questions on as needed basis. Control strategy, defined in ICH Q10 and Q8R2. Some special consideration to control strategy are listed in these bullet points. State of control, process dynamics. I don't know if Justine is going to talk about process dynamics or not tomorrow, but he gave, in my view, the best, the clearest, and easy to understand presentation process dynamics that I've seen in the last 10 years. I hope you will have a repeat tomorrow morning. Other issues related to control strategy are listed here. One of the key aspects of control strategy is the state of control. And I'm sure Sal and Professor Trout and others in this room will remember a heated debate we had in 2014 about steady state, where the regulator insisted that you collect the material only under a steady state. Yes, steady state is important from engineering and quality aspects, but state of control is a quality terminology we all agree to, which is the range within which the quality specifications are acceptable, right? So it will encompass steady state, but you don't have to collect the material only at steady state. I talked about deviation before, and I give you a heads up about what Giussino may do tomorrow about process dynamics and modeling process dynamics. Raw material and intermediates. Raw material is very important because if you run the process for a long time, you may use different batches of raw material. How that will work. Equipment, special equipment maintenance. What do you do in case of equipment failure? Are you going to have backup? Are you going to have maintenance schedule? How that will enter into your intention for how long you run the process. Product collection or rejection. Traceability is very important. Process monitoring and sampling. I'm just running through some of the key aspects here for you to be aware. Some of the relevant quality and GMP aspects are listed here. I think I mentioned that GMP supports continuous manufacturing. Pharmaceutical quality system that is existing will need to be reevaluated to ensure that it addresses specific issues related to continuous processing, batch release, and state of control. Process validation, and I think there was a good question about what do we do with process validation. Process validation for APIs is easy because we have ICH Q7A, which is the only GMP ICH guideline. So for Q7A, it's good. For drug product, there is diversion on process validation. In the US, there is a guideline called life cycle process validation that encourage continued process verification, where you do the design space, the design phase, and then you do the qualification phase, and you do the continued process verification phase. This life cycle approach is not accepted in Europe. In Europe, you can do it in two ways. Traditional process validation, 3 batches, or continuous process verification. That means you continue to monitor the process from A to Z. Not a bad thing. In Japan, they accept only the 3-batch validation. But the good news is we made progress with our Japanese colleague on the Symposia team, Yoshihiro Matsuda, who now at BMDA leads a group and they accept continuous process verification. So I think we are moving in the right direction. Regardless of what approach, I think it's important when you present your approach to process validation that you go to the regulator and convince them that whatever you do is sufficient to evaluate the process robustness and reproducibility, how reproducible the process and how robust your process is. Okay? These are the goals of process validation. So you have to keep that in mind. In my way of thinking, when I do regulatory stuff for clients or whoever, that you look at the bigger picture. What is the objective of a certain regulatory activity, right? And how are you going to meet that? The other approach that I don't support, maybe you guys do, is to follow specific guidelines and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My approach is, why are we doing this and how are we going to meet this? And if you do that, then you can have a good conversation. Again, some very important and key quality and regulatory issues are listed in this slide. What do you do for raw material? Detection and treatment of non-conformity. training, material carryover, material diversion. We talked about that earlier as well. Raw material variability, equipment failure, what do you do? All these things I'm listing here in the last 3 slides are not new. They have been core aspects of traditional GMP, but the intention of objectives of these and the way to meet these objectives are different for continuous, okay? So there is nothing new except the process is different, so you have to meet it differently. You have to be a little bit more intelligent about the objectives and how they can be met. Cleaning validation is a big deal for continuous process. The consideration is the same as batch, but there are some key aspects for continuous processing I'm listing here. Material holdup, you're gonna run the process for a long time. What do you deal with that? Material degradation, microbial growth, formation of chemical film, cleaning agent removal, if you're gonna run the process. When are you gonna stop it? Product changeover, equipment size and complexity, cleaning frequency, all these things you have to have for each one of these specific SOPs to address. You heard already about bridging or moving from batch process to continuous process. It is doable. It can be done. And as I mentioned before, ICHQ12 will facilitate that aspect of lifecycle management. I think you have to do a careful assessment in order to convince the regulators that the new process will provide material with the same quality as the batch process, right? And that you have done an adequate characterization. Let me stop here. When you talk about chemical equivalence, it is not sufficient that you test the material to specification before and after the change. You have to do more extensive physicochemical characterization, so things that are not necessarily in the specification in order to ensure chemical equivalency. This will not be required every time you release a batch, but it's required for you to get the approval of the new manufacturing process. What about bioequivalence? I think bioequivalence may or may not be needed. I would suggest that if you are not changing the formulation and the material produced is the same as the batch process, you may not need it. But if you are changing the formulation or even changing some of the aspects of the ABI that may impact bioequivalence and the solution, etc., bio study may be required. Compendium considerations. So good news, guys. Compendia pharmacopoeias are very interested in continuous manufacturing now. So the USCB formed a team, and they had a couple of roundtable discussion on continuous processing. The European Pharmacopoeia started to think about that. As a matter of fact, I had a good discussion and the presentation in Strasbourg in June, a couple of months ago, about what the impact of continuous processing on compendia. I'm listing some of the things here. To be brief, I think general definitions in pharmacopoeia need to be introduced for continuous processing. Some new chapters about excipients need to be introduced because there may be additional requirements for continuous. Also, pharmacopoeias need to be, in my view, better prepared for real-time release testing, because now the traditional approach about stop and test may not be the same. Regardless, finished drug product has to meet the current specification and pharmacopoeia requirements. The good news, more good news, both USCB and EDQM are currently represented on ICH Q13 and Q14. So that's good. Because the fear I had, and I'm sure some of you, that you get your product through the regulatory process and the pharmacopoeial requirement will not be there aligned with continuous processing, and then you run into trouble. So I think everybody is moving in the right direction now. So are we all good? Not really. We have some remaining regulatory gaps and challenges. I think lack of global harmonization, is a key issue, and I'm hopeful that Q13 will do what we expect of them. Process validation, we are not there yet, but I think our thinking is there. The level of detail of regulatory filing, and I have shared with my friends in regulatory authorities that if the expectations will be all engineering details will be regulatory part of the manufacturing process, that could be the end of continuous processing because there is a lot more engineering details. But if these are considered aligned with the concepts outlined in ICH Q12 as supportive information, I think we'll be in good place. Modeling and predictive process control, we already have some guideline in the space, but we need to do more because some of the models we use continuous to control the process and even to release the product by ICH definitions are considered high-risk models. And updating high-risk models require pre-approval by the regulators. I think we have to have a little bit more flexibility there because some of these models need to be updated as you run the model, and we need to find a way for easy updating and validation of these models. Some unique aspects of bioprocessing for large molecules, and as I mentioned, the opportunity for performance-based approach. I want to talk about finish my presentation sharing with you recent development and achievements. 2 slides. The first slide lists it's a repeat of what Professor Trout mentioned. His slide, we have 5 drugs approved in the US, we have 4 in Europe, and we have 2 in Japan. And knowing what I know, and you know, there are many others under development and under regulatory approval. So we are making significant progress, but to some of us, may not be fast enough, and we need to work harder. So I think we have had, and in my view, we had that since the quality by design concept, we have some very transparent and open conversation. If you guys recall, prior to 2005, all CMC discussion was kept internally as a secret, but now there has been the concept of very competitive collaboration, and people are sharing and discussing more. ICH Q13 hopefully will address these 3 key points: the key definitions, the regulatory expectation, including process validation, and also further elaboration on model maintenance and updates. Now, last but not least, there are efforts underway, and some of us are involved in this, to accelerate adoption of manufacturing innovation. And there is a paper that's in press. It has been published online already. And the paper is titled, Why We Need Continuous Pharmaceutical Manufacturing and How to Make It Happen, a summary of thoughts from the International Symposium on Continuous Manufacturing. It will be published shortly in PharmSci, and Professor Trout is the lead author, Sal and myself as co-authors. And I think with that, I'm going to bring this paper. I have it. If you want to take a look, I'll be happy to share it with you. It provides some specific recommendations about some business and regulatory incentives that, if they are accepted, it will make a huge shift towards innovation in general and also continuous manufacturing. So to conclude my presentation, the regulatory expectation in general is similar to batch. Risk-based assessment is a key to determine what specific activities you need to do. It's necessary to evaluate your quality system to identify the gaps. ICH Q13 could provide additional and needed regulatory clarity. The time is now to introduce continuous manufacturing. Additional financial and regulatory incentives may be needed to accelerate adoption. And I would like to acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues, Clive Batman and Alistair from CMAC, Professor Trout and Cooney from MIT, Konstantin from Kodiak, Marcus Krum from Novartis, Sal, Larry Lee from FDA. All of us are working together as a team to help drive and enhance adoption of continuous manufacturing. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I finished on time. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Hello, wonderful talk. I have a question about models and their role in the process. They can be very complicated and involve a lot of new parts. What's your recommendation for communicating models and model maintenance to the regulator?
Yes. So in my view and my advice, prior to filing, so I'm not talking about end of phase 2. I'm talking even prior to that. You meet with the regulators and you share with them the totality of the control strategy and what the role of model will be in the control strategy. Because I also will like to refer you and others to ICH website. There is an implementation working group on ICH Q8, 9, 10. And we wrote a paper. It's called Point to Consider on the Role of Modeling and Quality by Design. So look at that. If you don't have it, I'll share it with you. And basically, we group the model into 3 classes: low risk, medium risk, high risk. So the low risk models are models you use while you are developing the process. The medium risk models are models used to monitor the process and in addition to additional testing you do. The high-risk models are the models that will be used alone without any additional testing to release the batch. I encourage you to have a conversation, but prior to conversation, put your thoughts together about how you're going to do that. The only thing that I find difficult at this time, even though I kind of wrote that paper a long time ago, is that high-risk models, we agreed at that time, about 7, 8 years ago, that any changes need regulatory approval. I find that to be problematic now, especially if you are going to use this as a sole control in continuous processing. There is one here in front.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Hello, Paweł Stasiak, Teva Prague. I wanted to ask you if you are aware of any other procedures running in Europe, and if the procedures which were finished, these 4 products you mentioned, if the length of these procedures was similar or longer there for the usual products, for the usual process. Thank you.
I think in Europe, the products approved in the US are very much approved in Europe. In Europe, there is a procedure in place. EMA has a group called BET, working group, which is a sub-team of the quality working body. And you can request a meeting with the BET team and share with them in advance your proposal to introduce continuous processing. And I participated in this discussion when I was working at GSK. I found the BET team to be very open and willing and interested to have that conversation. So I think this is a process in place. You can ask them specific questions related to a specific filing. So some of the questions I heard, not personally, but I heard from others, they asked about stability testing requirement for post-approval changes, and I found the European regulators very keen to encourage you, and maybe you can do less stability data requirement to submit variations, etc. So I think it's good. I hope there will be more alignment among all regulators, and that's why myself and others have been pushing for Q13. There is one in the front, and there is one in the middle. Take the one in the front first, please.
Hi, thanks for a nice presentation. So my question is that whatever design is happening in the continuous manufacturing, is this design is best for a dedicated product line, or the thought on the product-to-product changeover while designing the equipment is given there?
Design space.
Yeah. Is the design is for only dedicated product on a continuous line, or we can go for the multiple product also?
I'm afraid I'm not following your question, so could you please help me understand?
So whatever design in the continuous manufacturing is happening,
Design
right now,
of the continuous manufacturing.
continuous
Okay.
line, is the thought process as given for product to product changeover also? From one product to other product?
Right. That's a very good question. Now I understand. I think you can set your regulatory strategy at the platform level. And then you can implement that platform strategy to individual products. So my advice to a company who is going into continuous manufacturing, that they set the regulatory approach at the platform. Here is what we are going to do for continuous. And then you can implement this on individual products. What I see some companies doing is doing it for a specific product and then transferring it to another product, which is less acceptable as well. But my preference and my advice to clients and colleagues is to do it at the platform level. Because if you go to the regulator, for example, FDA or EMA, and say, here is our corporate plan for continuous, and here is what we're going to do from development, from technical, from quality, from regulatory, etc. And the first product we'll do has this specific features and how we are going to implement this. So platform level and product level. You can do it either way. My encouragement is to do it at the platform level first.
Thank you. Also, I want to emphasize on the line what you mentioned, that all the machine manufacturers, they must start talking to the regulators.
Absolutely.
Because it's very important. Right now, what's the message is happening? That message is going from the user to manufacturer, and then they work on the design, and then things are get, evolved. And there is always different gaps, and there is always different feedback from different users to the manufacturer of the equipment. I think it's a very important point. I just want to emphasize again.
No, I agree with you, and I think it would be even better if you, as the end product manufacturer, go and meet with the regulator and include in your group equipment manufacturer as well. So in other words, let's have an open and transparent discussion. But since ICHQ 13 is still not published yet, I think the best advice I can give you is to go and meet with the regulator directly.
Thank you.
Sure. This one here.
Thank you. Frank Geisman from Bayer. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, and then your
I have a
colleague in the
question
back.
in regard to the regulatory landscape. So
Sure.
we're talking about FDA, EMA, so the two big markets, Japan as well, but they're also, especially for post-approval products, or let's say changes for well-established products, a lot of other countries where we have to register afterwards. So how is your impression about, let's say, going into a harmonized standard? Because if I change a process, I don't want to run 3 lines saying one is for the FDA, for the US market, one is for the European market, and then I have to continue with the old stuff for the other countries that will not, most likely will follow.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's why we embarked on ICH Q12. And let me tell you who are the regulatory members of Q12, who will agree and accept the concepts I described related to post-approval changes and lifecycle management. US FDA, European Union, MHLW, BMDA, Japan, Korea, Brazil, China, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, and others, Taiwan, and many others. So we have worked really hard to include not every country in the universe, the 180 or 182 or whatever, but I would say the majority of the players. So I'm hopeful that ICH Q12 concepts will be adopted soon by all these countries, and ICH Q13 as well. On personal note, prior to including all these members, I think regulators who are not the major regulators are eager to hear from industry about their plan prior to sending the change or the supplements, etc. So I'm optimistic It's happening now, and we have worked really hard to make it happen. So, sure.
Tony Carpenzano from JRS Pharma. And first of all, thank you very much. Great presentation. I hear a lot of talk about equipment and process control, but one major piece that you don't hear much about is excipients. Can you comment on what regulatory bodies globally are doing to improve or speed the acceptance and issuance of monographs for co-processed high functionality excipients that are designed specifically for continuous manufacturing?
Yeah, fair question. It's very important. And to second your thoughts, when you look at a typical tablet or capsule, the majority of the stuff there is not the API. It is the excipient. So I hear you. I agree with you. I don't think there is anything specific. I know some excipient manufacturer associations, such as ISPE, have been very active in this space. Pharmacopoeias, and I mentioned some specific recommendation from myself and others to include some more monographs on excipients that could be more relevant to continuous processing. But I don't know of the regulator specifically working on that. I know pharmacopoeias are, and I know excipient manufacturers are. Again, if a manufacturer will have a need to use non-traditional or functional excipient that for manufacturability purpose, I encourage them to talk to the regulators. Other questions?
Yeah, hi. Relating to one of the other questions, how far away do you think some of the international markets are from accepting a continuous submission? So you mentioned a lot of countries, but other countries like Vietnam or Pakistan?
Yeah, I'm not aware. I'm aware of products approved in the 3 major markets. I'm also aware of some products are currently under review by countries I mentioned as member of ICH, like Brazil and Singapore, etc. But for less smaller markets, if you wish, like Pakistan or Vietnam, we are not there. My thinking is many of these smaller markets are becoming more accepting of products approved by major markets. Divergence and convergence have been 2 topics discussed. I know in some countries, I'll give you an example, in several countries in the Middle East and also Singapore, if the drug is accepted by 2 major regulatory authorities, namely FDA and EMA, they will do a very fast review or no review to accept the drug. Because they have realized and they have more confidence of the thoroughness of the review by these major players. So I think that's a step in the right direction. The opposite of that every small country have a very large review team without resources, and I don't think that's going to work. So I don't have a specific approval in smaller market, but I think they are more accepting. I'm aware of, personally aware of an OTC drug that's currently being considered for continuous manufacturing, and earlier conversation with countries in the Middle East where this is a major market for that, they have been very willing to consider that. So.
Yeah, with respect to batch failure, if you give some more insight on, in any one of the particular unit operation, let us take OSD from granulation to till compression or coating. If any one unit operation is, what is that, equipment breakdown or milling, if there is any issues or something, how to address and how to give the rational justification while writing the investigation. If you give some insight, it would very useful.
Right. So I have seen that, and it depends. You know, the typical answer you get from a regulator is it depends, right? So it depends on what specific unit operation, and depends on the severity of the deviation. So what I've seen, two approaches. One approach is to stop and throw the material altogether. That's a very conservative approach. Another approach is to stop and to collect the suspected material, and after you fix the equipment, you continue running the process, and then the suspected material, you either throw it away or you test it, and you can add it to the batch. But you have to have a very specific strategy to do that. So you cannot tell the regulator that if my equipment will fail, I'm going to stop it and add that bad material later on. It's basically you're quarantining the material, right? And you are running the process, and then you can add it later on. I've seen that. I've seen that strategy accepted, but you have to provide with the regulators the specific testing you will do to ensure that material that's added to the good batch are good material.
Yeah, thank you. So your answer to me for the corrective action with respect to preventive action.
Say that again.
Your answer to my
okay.
corrective action, COPPA.
Yeah.
With respect to preventive action, I want some more insight from you.
No, absolutely. So, no, that's a very good question, very good question. So, once you have a problem of that cold, you will have to create your CABA, right? So your CABA, the corrective and preventive action, you will have to develop as part of your SOP, how are you going to manage that moving forward, right? Because what the regulator like to know that you are learning from your experience, and you want to use these learnings to improve quality. Not to go around it, but to improve quality. So your CABA plan will be maybe additional maintenance of equipment, something to do with the maintenance of equipment, or you change the runtime. You may change your definition of the batch. You may require additional testing or monitoring before you reach to that point. So so it depends on the situation. But I think you are correct. It's not only reaction to the problem you encountered, but you have to develop your CABA system to present it to the regulator. I agree with that. I think people are hungry for lunch, and are tired of hearing this regulatory stuff. Okay, yeah, I have one more question in the back. Someone who's not too hungry, I guess.
Hi, Stephen Klaus from Patheon. So batch size, going back to definition of batch size, is something that as we go through the development process and the filing process that we have to address, obviously, as part of regulatory. Supply chain flexibility is a huge plus for continuous manufacturing. You manufacture to commercial need, right? And especially as we're going through the process with some of our customers of filing their products on our continuous manufacturing lines, having this flexibility is of paramount importance to them. So one of our approaches that, and I just wanted to get your opinion on it, is rather than definition of batch size, using a risk-based approach, we're actually creating data that says we have a minimum quantity, and on the other end, we have a maximum quantity that we can demonstrate and validate that we can produce acceptable quality product. And therefore, during commercial manufacture, we will manufacture anywhere within that range. Is that?
No, it's not going to work.
Why is that?
Because you have part of the regulatory, it may change later on, but I'm sharing with you what I know. What the regulators prefer is you go with a specific proposal of the batch size. But the risk assessment you have done is very meaningful and useful. That you can say, for example, based on unforeseen market demand, you may reduce the batch, right, to a certain, and you have the data to support that the quality will be the same. So I hear you. I agree on the scientific and technical rationale you are sharing with me. I agree with that. But the regulator now, based on what I know, would like you to go with a specific proposal because of the concern they have for a new technology that people are not sure about the quality throughout the batch, and they may go stop on as needed basis, not for market need or for clinical reasons, but because of poor quality.
Okay, so just one follow-up question to that. So if I'm able to produce operational efficiency data that shows that my waste production is not atypical and falls within normal production guidelines, and I can also show that in the data-rich environment that is continuous manufacturing, that according to my process models and everything else, I'm within my validated space, why would that be of concern?
Okay, let me repeat. I'm agreeing with you from the technical and the quality perspective. But if you ask me to give you a regulatory advice, I'm giving you the regulatory advice.
Okay. Oh, they're not ready yet, basically.
They are not there yet. Okay. But what you have will be a good rationale in case you need to change the batch size.
Okay.
But you have to go with a specific plan about how you are going to define your batch and how much material you're going to do. You can also have a conversation with them that if there is a need, justifiable need to change the batch size, here is the data I acquired and here is my plan moving forward. That would be good. But you cannot go and say, I have that broad design space, if you wish, and I'm going to stop on any time between 1 kilogram to 1,000 kilo. There is a concern today related to this point.
This will change in future, you believe?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it would. But you remember I talked about trust and confidence and all that? Because if you presented some regulators, maybe those who are less enlightened, if you wish, they may think that you are playing a game. I think we all can agree that regulators are justifiable, knowing what we know about some quality issues we encounter globally, to be concerned about someone gaming the system. I know you are not gaming the system. You are providing the scientific foundation, and you expect the regulatory to overlay over this scientific foundation.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And the rationale behind that is similar to what we do for design space filings, right? I'm saying as long as I operate within this range with justifiable data, it should be acceptable. We're not ready yet, is what I hear. So, thank you.
One more here.
Hi, I have another question because in your presentation you mentioned BE studies, and I'm looking a little bit more for post-approval stuff. So is that, you mentioned, so if I don't have so many changes or only minor changes in the formulation and the end product meets the registered dossier and specification, I might have not to conduct a BE study. Is that somehow documented in the
No,
ICH?
it is not documented. You will have to fight for it really hard to get the regulator to agree to that. But let me explain to you what I mean by that.
Okay.
What I know for sure is this. If the API has exactly the same characteristics, not only tested the same, but the same physicochemical characteristics, surface area, crystal shape, etc., same level of impurities, etc., as the API produced with batch, you may not need to do biostudy. You may not. I did not say you do not need biostudy. You may not need, but you have to build a case because the regulator would like to have confidence. You see, the patient is not using an API. The patient uses the drug product. So they want to make sure that the drug products are equivalent. And that equivalence comes from pharmaceutical equivalency and bioequivalency. So whether you can do a bio-waiver or, or something like that, you need to do. The challenge with conducting biostudy, as I'm sure you and the others here know, in order to ensure that the biostudy is relevant, it has to be of good size, and that's very expensive.
Correct, and that's why I would like to comment on the first one, so that Mr. Toth said, okay, we are very conservative, but the conservative also coming along because any changes we are making, correct, it's time and cost consuming. So, and if there are some approaches in order to say, if I show that in vitro that everything is fine,
right,
so then we can shorten the timeline. But every time I'm touching something, it costs me X million, and I have to bring it back
Right.
into, would say, in a financial plan.
Right, I agree. So there is no specific guidelines on that. The only thing that's close to that is the 2014 International Symposium Continuous Manufacturing paper that was published in January 2015 in journal Pharmacy. And that paper indicate that if there is no change of formulation, very minor, you may not need bioequivalence.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm repeating that. I'm very careful. I don't want to give you an advice that's incorrect. Okay. Well, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to moderating the rest of the program this afternoon and tomorrow, and enjoy your lunch.
Very quick message.